old friend. The panda will never fulfill his destiny, nor you yours, until you let go of the illusion of control.
Illusion?
Yes. Look at this tree, Shifu. I cannot make it blossom when it suits me, nor make it bear fruit before its time.
But there are things we can control. I can control when the fruit will fall. And I can control where to plant the seed. Hiya! That is no illusion, Master.
Ah, yes. But no matter what you do, that seed will grow to be a peach tree. You may wish for an apple or an orange, but you will get a peach.
But a peach cannot defeat Tai Lung.
Maybe it can, if you are willing to guide it, to nurture it, to believe in it.
But how? How? I need your help, Master.
No, you just need to believe. Promise me, Shifu. Promise me you will believe.
I will try.
Good. My time has come. You must continue your journey without me.
What are you... What? Master! You can't leave me!
You must believe.
Master!
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello and welcome to another Q&A of the Return of the Repressed. Glad to be here with you. Glad to sit down with you again. Merry Christmas to everybody. This is the second time I say that on this podcast. Last time was conveniently 1 year ago, so schedule is on schedule. What did I want to say? I wanted to say thank you everybody who is a patron, obviously, and everybody who became a patron during December. Such a great Christmas gift. Really, I'm really happy, and even though I'm so happy about that, I actually, when sort of now meeting friends and family for the first time in a year, who hasn't witnessed the progress, the glorious progress of the podcast, it wasn't. I didn't want to, just say, oh, I'm making this and this much money from the podcast now, or maybe soon it'll be a full-time job. Like most of the times, what really ended up being the thing that I told people about was all the kind messages that I've received like throughout this year. Some of you just write like one message, just letting me know how much you like the podcast, and some are long, some are short, and some are very personal, and some are like general reviews, and they're so encouraging, and they're even more encouraging the numbers. And I'm not just saying that because that's like how I spontaneously told of the podcast, and why I do it, or like why does it excite me so much, and why do I seem so happy when I talk about the fact that I'm making this podcast. I thought before that I was going to address it like if somebody, like an old friend I haven't met in years, and you get the regular question, oh, so what are you up to these days? I wanted to sort of I wanted obviously to say something like, yeah, well, I'm an author now, and I don't know, I write spoken words, poetry, polemics, philosophical essays, etc., etc. They're like, oh, okay, well, you publishing that or what? And I'd be like, yeah, self-publishing, making some money. But I just ended up saying, most of the times that I have a podcast, and some people really like it, and they're so encouraged by it. So I don't know, less fancy, I guess. I mean, I don't really know what my point was telling you this, but I think at the end of the day, just very happy that some of you are still here 2 or 1 year later. It's great. I really hope whether you're alone or if you're with family and friends, or maybe you don't even celebrate Christmas at all, just hope you have a nice end of the year, and that you have a great next year. I will spoil something about next year, what's coming up. So I still have a few of these Q&As to do. But maybe they will become, they will transition maybe over into, like they'll be running one of or a few more of them, as well as at the same time as I start the ecofascism season 2, Lysenko Strikes Back. That's gonna be I think that hopefully I've been reading so much stuff, like deep L translated Russian books from some of Lysenko's old followers, a lot of Chinese texts. The Chinese source is really interesting because, well, I'm not going to spoil too much. I'll tell you later why that's interesting. Just great stuff. It's red alert on hard mode, trying to get into these things, but I think I'm ready for it. I got the micro, and yeah, hopefully that'll be great. And I think you will all appreciate it very much. Most of you anyway. And yeah, but today, because yeah, of course the Stargate conspiracy is in no way over, and it will be running as well. And even though Reid carries the burden of listening to me once a month for hours on end, he has been kind enough to send me a question. And I'll just play that question, and then I'll answer it. Well, I'll talk a bit about why it's a good question first, and then I will answer the question. All right, so here we go.
Hey, Marcus, it's Reid. So my question is in kind of 2 parts. The first of which comes from Twitter user Fragment ARNYJ. It was a really interesting account I've been talking to a little bit. And they suggest the idea, or pose the question of, is there an anti-Aswang case? That is, where belief in something like vampires could be used to fight against imperialists by a national liberation movement. So for context, of course, the Aswang is a kind of creature in Filipino mythology that's sort of like a vampire, analogous to a vampire, that in the late 1940s, early 50s, the CIA's Psy War division, they're led by the infamous Edward Lansdale, manipulated in the way that they would assassinate and then display the bodies of militants. If I recall correctly, they would drain the bodies of blood and create artificial puncture marks in the neck and sort of hang them upside down for other militants to find. And I think this is a really interesting idea because there's sort of an imperialist conceit that national liberation movements like North Vietnamese or various movements around the world by virtue of being both national liberation movements and non-white, are susceptible to superstitions and magical thinking. But of course, as we know from our investigations into the Nine and the Stargate conspiracy, the haute bourgeois are some of the most superstitious true believers in the world. And this isn't just an isolated incident. You can go back and look in the 19th century, and there's robber barons who were obsessed with spiritualism and seances. And today, of course, we have, in particular, a fascination among the haute bourgeois with UFOs and sort of the alien cult that's emerging. Guys like Lawrence Rockefeller, who believed himself to be a pharaoh of Atlantis and was bankrolling MUFON, to Christopher Mellon, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, who's one of the leading figures in the so-called disclosure movement, pushing belief in UFOs and aliens. So do you know any examples of this kind of an idea of an anti-Aswang case where that sort of psychological warfare has been used by communists or national liberation movements? Seems like an interesting idea, and certainly the bourgeois mind is susceptible to that kind of thinking. Let me know what you think.
Thank you for that question, Reid. What a great question. Really good one. And I think it's a great question, since I often feel when doing research, coming across information that one might not have expected or even wanted to find out, one can become somewhat cynical, and we might forget that there is some real use in believing in things, in believing in something bigger than ourselves, especially if we are dealing with a material signifier of historical necessity, of overcoming the contemporary mood of things. And cynicism is a false escape in this sense. Feeling nothing, being moved by nothing, will not neutralize the lure of jouissance. Such an attitude still enjoys some secret pain that was probably superstructurally constructed by ideology, despite, of course, a common wisdom excuse that it is just pure spontaneity or merely natural or nothing that they can do about it. Thus, instead, I think we can take some simple pleasure in appreciating something which bothers people with a cynical, realist attitude. I mean, I personally feel a little kick when answering with phrases like, "Oh yes, it is wishful thinking. I am fully wishing for communism and the end of capitalism," for example. Now, a second approach then is more in tune with the intent of your question. How can we exploit the enemies for closed wishful thinking? The cynicist Randians' denied but very real and lingering desires, etc. And I had some trouble with the direction of this answer. I wished, it's still going to be a really long answer. It's going to be the longest so far, I think, because you've taken so much time to help me with the Stargate conspiracy that I feel it's only appropriate that I give you some of my time as well. And what I initially wanted to do was to point, towards historical aristocratic figures such as Báthory Erzsébet or Elizabeth Báthory, the Hungarian noblewoman whom, with the help of her servants, according to popular legend, serial killed and tortured hundreds of young girls, as she, as a vampire, was very fond of bathing in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. Of course, nobody wants to live as an old person forever. We seem to know that she was walled into a secluded room of an even more secluded castle in Slovakia. However, the more I read about these women, another picture started to appear, not suitable as a shining example of leftist or peasant popular revolutionary appropriation of superstition. And I'll get to why in a bit, but I'll give some more examples of like what I looked into, such as Elizabeth Branch, who was I think hanged for having, together with her daughter, who was also hanged, by the way, often beaten, humiliated, and sometimes kill her servants together, a story somewhat similar to the third Elizabeth Brownrigg, who was also hanged, or the Czech noble Kateřina Komarova, who admitted to having mistreated 14 serfs to death, though some say 30, before being condemned to imprisonment and starvation in a seldomly visited tower of Prague's castle. In the New World, of course, there is also plenty of people, such as New Orleans socialite vampire Delphine Lalaurie, who was accused of having committed some real sicko murders against her slaves. And there are plenty more, of course, of different style, such as the Greek Orthodox abbess called Mother Rasputin, whose alleged modus operandi was to encourage wealthy women to join the covenant and then torture them until they donated their fortunes to the monastery. The thing is, though, I think, well, the thing that sort of grew on me was that I came to this. I mean, the first thing that I struck my mind when I was trying to find an answer to your question was that I had remembered I used to have in junior high school, I think I got like a huge lexicon of only sort of, one of those like what's the real story behind something. And there's like one big page about, so where did the first Dracula come from, right? Like the Tepes, the Impaler, right? In Transylvania. And I remember in that book they were talking a little bit about how peasants would often, make these stories to rally against a real enemy. Like even though maybe the vampire wasn't, maybe he wasn't really a vampire in the sense that he gained something supernatural from impaling these people or drinking these people's blood. Like his behavior in every respect is vampirical, but maybe the supernatural part is not why people told this story and attacked this man. I don't even know if he was attacked actually, but yeah, this was like a sort of a footnote to it. And so now when I went to look for him on Wikipedia, where I found some of these women were also in that book, but there were so many more on Wikipedia, like a long list. And so my thinking is this, that why are there so many female vampires throughout the ages? And why are they so readily available? Like, why is there so much historical documentation on female vampires of the aristocracy? Surely there should be more than Vlad the Impaler on the male side. I mean, very often male aristocrats have more power than women. Thus, stochastically even, there should be true that more often than not it is men who abuse their power in vampirical ways, and there should be more information about that too. But then when I did, dig deeper into some of these stories, I often found very ample evidence that, which other researchers have pointed out as well, of a class war not from the bottom up, but often within the clergy or the nobility, or between these relatively autonomous social icon spheres. And so, power struggles, which, surprise, surprise, often seems fueled by male chauvinism and greed. And of course, right? You can't be a lord and then there's like a baroness in the papal state next to you who's twice as wealthy. I mean, she's got to be a vampire, right? It is just embarrassing otherwise. And so I left that team aside and picked up the scent closer to my contemporary home. So I will take you now, Reid, and dear listeners, on a long and windy road to the temple of my answer in the Middle Kingdom. Try not to get bored, and trust me when I tell you that I will tie it all together already tonight. Come with me. From 1368 to 1644 in the Western Counting, China was ruled by the Ming dynasty, a time when puddling metallurgy was invented to purify pig iron, something which would first be invented, quote-unquote, in Europe in the 1780s in England. This technological improvement of the economic base, the new cheap iron being made into agricultural tools, as well as promising cereal grasses, tubers and vegetables from the New World, resulted in a dialectics of quickly expanding commercial plantation enterprises. The determined exploitation of the Ming subjects on gigantic areas of mono cash crops also began to create new class relationships, and like in Europe, a new historical bloc of merchants and their judiciary bureaucrat hangabout increased their powers. In other words, it is now that the mandarins will really begin to become the landed gentry. We could think of them as the state bourgeoisie. Thus it is now that Chinese Marxist historians speak of 资本主义萌芽, the sprouts of capitalism, i.e. the historical materialist Chinese term which was first used in the first chapter named Chinese Society of the book named The Chinese Revolution and the Chinese Communist Party, edited by Mao Zedong in 1939. Quote, as China's feudal society had developed a commodity economy, and so carried within itself the seeds of capitalism, China would of herself have developed slowly into a capitalist society, even without the impact of foreign capitalism. End of quote. The commodity form demands violent protection. But despite new gunpowder weapons being introduced, such as land and water mines, explosive cannonballs, multi-stage rockets in the shape of dragons aided by booster rockets that would later release swarms of smaller rockets from the main missile, as well as hand cannons with 10 pipes, China was conquered in 1644, this time not by the Mongols but the Manchus, that Siberian people from Manchuria whom the Chinese called Donghu, Eastern barbarians. This invasion and the emerging Manchu order of things changed how the tax-paying Huns would do business, and as a consequence we see a great increase of secret societies. Sterling Seagrave writes in his The Song Dynasty from 1985, and this is the Song Dynasty referring to the Three Sisters song, not the Song's dynasty proper as the historical period, but rather that particular family which connected by blood both Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek, as well as American Christianity of the Methodist. Quote, there have always been such secret societies in China, piratical bands and esoteric sects, but until the 17th century they were fragmented and iconoclastic. The year of the Manchu conquest, 1644, was a watershed. After that, a new network of secret societies spread across the landscape, dedicated to unshoring the Manchus. End of quote. When asking someone who has trained in old temples, some of them first built long before the Manchus, as to how to understand Chinese secret societies, of course I have to bring you back, dear listener, to Bodhidharma, the semi-legendary founder of the Chan or the Zen school, and even more legendary the Shaolin monasteries, and as such venerated by many as the grandfather of martial arts. Dogen, the founder of Soto-Zen, says in the Shobogenzo, quote, as my master put it, the honored great master Shakyamuni, whilst with his assembly on India's divine Vulture Peak, imparted to Makakasho this Dharma, which ancestor after ancestor then correctly transmitted down to the venerable Bodhidharma. The Venerable One proceeded on his own to China, where he imparted the Dharma to Great Master Eka. This was the first time that the transmission of the Buddha Dharma had come to the Eastern lands. The genuine Dharma of the Buddha then flowed out through the land of the Han, its main purpose being revealed without entanglement in sectarian or scholastic concerns. It began while Great Master Bodhidharma was spending 9 years facing the wall at Shorin-ji Temple of Mount Susan, by which, this is Marcus speaking, by which he means the Shaolin Temple of Mount Song. Neither monks nor laity had yet learned of the Buddha's true Dharma, so they called him the Brahman who makes seated meditation, Sazen, or Datsuo, or Suochan, his main focus. Later, all his descendants over the generations continually devoted themselves to seated meditation. Lay people, baffled when they saw this, did not understand what was actually going on, and spoke of it in general as the Zazen school. Nowadays the Za is dropped and it is referred to simply as the Zen school. End of the quote in its entirety. This is of course a relatively scholastic introduction. Dogen has, however, more mysterious tales to tell about Bodhidharma. Let's take, for example, his retelling of Xiao Shou Chongshen, the great master of the Gong'an, who once, when a monk asked the master, "What is a true statement?" replied, "Your mother is ugly." At another time, when a student came to ask, quote, "What did our ancestral master Bodhidharma come from the West for?" Question mark. The master replied, "For a cypress tree in the courtyard." The monk then said, "Venerable monk, pray, do not use some physical object to point it out to a person like me." The master said, "I'm not pointing it out to you by using a physical object." The monk again asked, "Well then, what did our ancestral master come from the West for?" The master replied, "For a cypress tree in the courtyard." End of quote. The cypress tree being a pine and an evergreen, which keeps its greenness in the winter, is the common metaphor in China for friends who remain constant in adversity. So let's try to find out what the cypress tree in the courtyard could be said to include when forming really close bonds. The Chinese character for martial in martial art depicts someone putting down a foot or a palm to stop a weapon. You might be reminded of scenes in kung fu films when someone stops a sword with a finger or an arrow in the middle of two clasped palms, etc. Or that traditional stance of the Shaolin monks with a foot far in front of their defensive posture. As honorable as that might sound, other more offensive practices were carried out in the honor of martial ambitions, even though the god of war in the East is not called Mars, as in martial. Monasteries at the time, especially those who were developing secret fighting systems, were often packed with military professionals who had either been exiled after falling out of favor with a superior or sent by their superiors as spies to keep up to date with the latest in the art of assassination. Thus, by the time Bodhidharma's successor Huike stepped up to take over, the second incident of what is collectively known in Buddhism or Buddhist history as the three disasters of Wu, in Chinese San Wu Zhi Huo, happened or took place. This was the Emperor Wu of Northern Zhou's persecution of This was the Emperor Wu of Northern Zhou's persecution of Buddhism, which closed down the temples as well as many others and sent Huike on his way. So they closed down the Shaolin temple, right? This took place in the 6th century. We are already in semi-legendary territory here regarding Bodhidharma's connection to the Shaolin monastery, But I found out by doing some translation that things get even more mysterious, since the aforementioned Chinese character for martial in martial arts is the exact same Wu as in the 3 disasters of Wu. So the first disaster was brought down on Buddhism by Emperor Tai Wu of Northern Wei 100 years earlier, when he realized that rebels were organizing in secret and stockpiling weapons in Buddhist monasteries. The second incident was, as just mentioned, that of Emperor Wu of Northern Zhou, and the third, which was 300 years later, and the greatest, was that of Emperor Wu Zong during the Tang, who burned down 4,600 temples, confiscating their riches to fund his armies, and some say, like the other Wus, also their Buddhist books on martial techniques. In other words, the Wus wanted to know about the Wu. One story is told of how one Shaolin order fought on the side of one of the Wu emperors, who then rewarded that Shaolin order with his blessing, commemorated by a 3-sided imperial seal. And it is from this 3-sided emblem that the triads, the Chinese mafia, would one day take its name. But that might just be a story. Another more corroborated legacy story surrounds that of the successor of the great rebel leader Guo Xingye, who fled the Manchus to Taiwan, where he threw out the Dutch colonizers. Seagrave writes, quote, Guo Xingye's resistance movement included a powerful spy system and underground. After his death, his underground fragmented, but 128 militant Buddhist monks who were part of the resistance held out against the Manchu army at the Shaolin monastery near Fuzhou. They were unusually skilled at the martial art that is now called Kung Fu. A traitor betrayed them to the Manchus, and only 18 escaped. One by one, the heroic monks were tracked down until only 5 remained. These 5 Kung Fu masters became the nucleus of a new anti-Manchu resistance, which was organized along the lines of the ancient sects and pirate guilds of classical China. It was given the name Hong League after the first emperor of the Ming, Hong Wu. End of quote. Right, so they are naming themselves after a Chinese emperor, right, before the Manchu took over. So like the Ming is considered like, you know, the heyday of Chinese Han China proper, right? And so that's why they named themselves like that, Hong League. Now, again, when I looked up this 4th imperial Wu, the Hong Wu, who they named themselves after, it is the same fucking Wu. So these 5 monks would then become the semi-legendary forefathers of almost every secret society in China for centuries, including but not limited to the Tian Di Hui, later to become the triads, also known as the Hongmen, i.e. the vast family. Overall, these originally Ming-loyal anti-Manchu secret societies are usually grouped into 2 categories. So they are the religious northerners called Jiao, and the political southerners called Hui. So Jiao meaning faith or divine instruction, Hui generally translated as society or organization, though the cut is not clear in any way, as we will see. To make things a bit freaky, let us note that it was not just fighting techniques that filtered out of or were robbed from the Chan and Shaolin temples. Tactics and techniques of mind control, both over self and others, sometimes called Neijing or Neigong, which focus on the internal skills, were also greatly sought after. This also involved the long tradition of Neidan practices, of internal alchemy, which is how it's usually translated, which is, to be honest, most often quite haphazard manipulation of internal energy flow to cause near-death experiences, astral projection, vision, or visions or psychosis, should you sleep or eat too little and refuse the natural light setting of this precious body of ours. In addition, I will mention, though the name Jing, meaning vigor, of Neijing is not the same character as the Jing of the three treasures of Taoist medicine, the other being the more famous concept of Qi, as well as Shen. They sound a bit similar and they are related. The Jing of Taoist medicine is primarily, or medicine in general to be honest, is primarily said to reside in the kidney. Boring, one thinks initially, looking for exciting mind games, but I was once told that this is the only energy and organ which we cannot feel. It is thoroughly unconscious, compared to the breathing sensation that is qi, or the ecstasy, let's say enthusiasm, of Shen, meaning either God, gods, or spirit, depending on which school you ask. Again, the other two energies of existence. In other words, this Shifu pointed out, it's pointless to try to consciously manipulate it. Better to remain sober enough to notice its symptoms or appreciate a spontaneous phenomenon. Somewhere in between the Qi and the Shen then, right? A phenomenon of the body, one might assume. But again, Qi, breathing, closely related to the body, and I mean there is some bodily part, right, that does experience that highest energy, or the most lofty energy, let's say, of the Shen. Now, nonetheless, we can see how a lot of mysticism and thus mindfuckery will be at the heart of all of this social tech to keep the mysterious cypress tree of close friendship heavily guarded. One good example of such a famous Ming-loyal anti-Manchu society is the White Lotus Society, which is actually, at least according to its name, a jiao, that is a fate, and not a hui, as in society. So it's already confusing here, but only due to Chinese translation, I guess. The roots of which go back much further than the 5 Buddhist founders of the Hong League, even beyond the Chan and Bodhidharma, to the early formations of the school which I was initiated to, namely the Pure Land School in the 3rd century. Obviously I wasn't initiated to the White Lotus Society per se, but it goes back to the earliest Pure Land schools. Now, if one studies old colonial maps of the British Empire, produced by their own proto-fascist secret societies, trading houses and companies, the conquered territory of the White Lotus sometimes shows up as a distinct landlocked country surrounded by the Qing. If that had something to do with opium smuggling and growing, I don't have the time to speculate too much upon, though again, the Tian Di Hui, or the Triads, also claim the White Lotus as their ancestral fraternity. There is also some indication of the Falun Gong having co-opted some of their legend and their underground ties to organized crime in Hong Kong. The Chinese Ministry of State Security, the Guojian Chuanbu, certainly seems to think so, and they probably know more about them than anyone, probably even more than the Falun Gongers themselves. Sun Yat-sen was a card-carrying member of the so-called San He Hui, the Three Harmonies Society, which is in turn one of the 3 branches of the Tian Di Hui at the time. And the doctors sought financial backing from both wealthy Americans and overseas Chinese triads known as the Tongs. The Three Harmonies was later absorbed by the Green Gang, a militant anti-communist syndicate of opium trading to which Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek belonged. I have promised to make a longer series about these, let's say, more merchant-oriented societies, but for now we will merely note that they were for the city folks. However, the real action of Chinese history, as we know from the most famous secret society on the planet, the Boxers, takes place on the countryside, where a single spark can start a prairie fire. So, to begin to finally answer your question, Reid, we must take a look at an offshoot from the very rural, very unmapped Elder Brothers Society, who had vowed to destroy the drug lords, the warlords, and the compradors in one giant swoop. This is the short summarized story of how the superstitions of the so-called Red Spear Society converted to a communist science of and for the peasantry.
Le Vietnam brûle et moi je hurle Mao Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao Mao. Le riz est fou et moi je joue Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao Mao. Les Russes mangent et moi je danse Mao Mao. Diable dénonce, je renonce Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
La base de l'armée, c'est le soldat. Le vrai pouvoir est au bout du fusil. Les monstres seront tous anéantis. L'ennemi ne périt pas de lui-même. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao.
The Society of Elder Brothers, the Ge Lao Hui, was descended through a distinguished and disturbing lineage of thought and threat that included art and artifice, craft and cunning from shamanism to Shaolin. Two of its most famous members in my mind are Chu De and He Long, two of the 10 founding marshals of the contemporary People's Republic. And it is from this society of elder brothers that the Red Spears emerged. But nothing is really clear, and it is actually impossible to make a real lineage. The Red Spears is most often tracked back to after the 1644 Manchu invasion, like so many others of these societies. It is important to remember that the Red Spears inherited, quote-unquote, their tactics and techniques, both physical and mental disciplines, from different temples, secret societies, sects, and cults that had gone before. Some of these techniques were decidedly treacherous and undoubtedly murderous. Their namesake red tassel, worn on their spears, probably derived from a Chinese martial art ritual of bestowing a red belt to those who had killed an opponent in battle, or in competition, I guess. The Red Spears were thus many different groups, held together by a loose ideology of quote-unquote provisions of brothers, paranoia of others, end of quote. A sliding scale of morality with some leaning towards the spiritual, that is the Jiao, some with the revolutionary, that is the Hui, and some more concerned with the financial. Like all secret societies in China, no matter their immediate orientation, Red Spears at least paid lip service to having been descended from the Shaolin. Although the Red Spears might have been remotely related also to the White Lotus mentioned before, as well as the Heaven and Earth Society, they were unmistakably descendants also of the Boxers. Most claimed that their teachers came from Caoshou Prefecture, around the north of the old Yellow River in southwest Shandong province. The movement in Henan had its beginning in Shangqiu County, just south of the old river, and across from Caochou. Rituals of the traditional school were simple and consisted of praying, incense burning, calling deities down from their abodes and meditating with legs crossed, all done at night and in remote areas. The Red Spears received their power of invulnerability from a rhymed magic formula that is called a jue, which they recited before their patron deity every night. They were, in other words, meditationists. They were also martial artists and practiced breathing exercises and body pounding with bricks and swords to augment their physical strength. This school had rigid disciplinary codes that prohibited rape, arson, murder, and robbery. Now, with the danger of this turning into some Steven Seagal shit, I will mention that the aforementioned mind control technique of Jingong is in this context very much a form of folkloric psychological warfare. According to Walter Laqueur, who does not much like the Red Spears, preferring the term gangsters over rebels, but then again he did work for the CIA-funded newspaper Soviet Survey to counter Soviet communist cultural propaganda, as they saw it in the West. He said the following in 1977. The Red Spears of the 1920s combined politics with exercises such as deep breathing and magic formulas, rather like the counterculture of the 1960s. But politics was only one of their many activities, and in this respect they resembled more the mafia than modern political terrorist movements. End of quote. Right, so in his opinion, either organized crime or political terrorist movement. And I think that the CIA's fear of the Red Spears should interest a little bit. So, don't think too much of this representation, but rather that, as Mao once put it, it is a good thing to be attacked by the enemy. Better yet, if they paint us completely black. It just means that we've achieved a lot in our praxis. Like many other shadowy groups, Red Spears were credited with possessing mystical powers. Some of this credit came from outsiders in awe of the Red Spears' abilities, while other such credit was propaganda and self-promotion by the Red Spear cadre. On one hand, cultivating superstitious awe and promising to bestow supernatural powers on the worthy was and is a marvelous recruiting tool. In the East, shadow knights like the assassins, India's Thagi, China's Lin Kuei, and Japan's ninja all knew the advantage of playing on their enemies' superstitions, of feeding their foes stories about their possessing magical powers to fly, to walk through walls, and of being able to kill with the so-called death touch. Maybe some of you have seen that French-American Jet Li film Kiss of the Dragon, which opposed CGI in kung fu films after The Matrix and Charlie's Angels trying to break the rules of that film tradition. And for those of you who haven't, it's about the dark arts of acupuncture, which is a real thing in terms of assassinations and medicine, perhaps though not as sensational as in the film.
Goodbye, mister.
What did you do to me?
I put a needle in your neck.
That's it?
In a certain point. Very forbidden. It's called the Kiss of the Dragon.
Kiss my ass!
The blood from your whole body goes to your head. It stops there. Never comes down. But soon, it will come out from your nose, your ears, even from your eyes. And then, you will die. Painfully.
You're really a smart guy, Johnny boy.
My name is not Johnny.
Now, the Red Spears realized that if their enemies believed that they possessed a sixth sense, which would grant them gift of mind reading and mind control, and this belief created an added layer of hesitation between them and their enemies. This was summarized in a motto, quote, "Sow 5, harvest 6," end of quote. Just like Lacan spoke of the quote-unquote other side of psychoanalysis, there is a dark science hidden for those who seek to flip the proto-psychoanalysis of the Buddha. Here are a few examples from the Dhammapada, the 423 sayings attributed to the Buddha himself. Quote, "As rain seeps through a badly patched roof, so too the 4 poisons leaks into the untrained mind: lust, hatred, delusion, and craving." End of quote. Thus it follows, if we can be damaged by these 4 weaknesses, so can our enemy, and we need to make sure his roof is not patched enough to sustain the artificial rain of the things we know he likes and dislikes. And regarding knowing yourself, quote, "Whatever one hater can do to another hater, whatever one enemy can do to another enemy, still your untrained mind can do to you with even greater harm. Even if a man is quick to spot the faults of others, and quicker still to take offense, his own evil faults will continue to grow until they lead him to destruction." End of quote. Dark Buddhism would thus teach that we spot our enemy's fault, we help them grow, without pointing them out, and shepherd him to a speedy demise. Bhagavan Sri Ranesh Osho let something slip once regarding how he maintained mastery of his disciples.
The questioner says, "At times you seem to intend to confuse us." No, you have not listened me well. I am always confusing, not at times. Confusion is my method. What I am trying to do by confusing you is uprooting you from your mind. I would not like you to have any roots in the mind, in the name of love or in the name of meditation or in the name of God. The moment I see that your mind is thriving on anything, I have immediately to uproot you from it. My whole effort is to create a no-mind state in you.
I'm confused hearing you say there is no God. There have been many beautiful moments in my life when I feel something moving through me, which I know is not me. I used to call it God. Now I call it godliness. But I still don't like hearing that there is no God. Can you ease my confusion?
Baby, my whole work is to confuse you. Unless you are utterly confused, you are not going to drop your knowledgeability. You want to convince yourself that you know it. So first I have to remove all your knowledge, which is bogus anyway. You have not earned it. You don't deserve it. It has not grown within you. It is all rubbish that you have collected from books, from people. I am going to confuse you more and more.
This is not the time to dwell deeper on the character who was Osho. But I'll say that I think that those were two separate talks, and after a while, listening to many of his talk, I think that whole thing was staged. I think the question is staged. I think the laughter is staged to a degree. Maybe the only thing that isn't really staged is his answers, or he's got a certain knack for improvisation. But like I said, not the time here to go further into that question. Though, obviously, confusion. Well, I see where, he thinks that he might be going with this. Or I've met many Osho followers, and I think I know where they think that he is going with this. There are many directions which I could take that critique, and my personal favorite example, being the oldest example that I have of the mention of mind control, is an old corruptive method warned about already in the Tang dynasty during the golden age of Zen by Nanyang Huizhong, born in the 7th century in China. I first learned about it in, again, the Shobogenzo, which perked my antenna as I became more uneasy about staying too long in certain temples. In this chapter, being the only one among the thousands of pages and the many, many chapters which explicitly deals with the topic of evil. This is the only chapter which deals with that topic. Here Dogen retells the warning of Nanyang some 4 centuries later. So how about we get really dark, dear listener? And I promise you, I am not trying to confuse you. The fully awakened Chinese national teacher Echu of the great Tang dynasty once asked the monk, "Where do you come from?" The monk replied, "I come from the south." The master asked, "Do you have good spiritual friends in the south?" The monk replied, "We have quite a few." The master asked, What do they point out to people?" The student then tells of a story where Buddha nature is mistaken for a kind of mysterious spiritual intelligence, quote unquote, which can be perfected and used for various means. Thus Nanyang Huizhong replies, "If this is so, then there is no difference between their teaching and the non-Buddhist view of the Shrenikans. The latter view states that there is a sort of divine nature in this body of ours, which has the capacity to know pain and itch, and that when the body disintegrates, this divine aspect departs from it, like a householder fleeing when his house is on fire. The dwelling is impermanent whilst its householder is forever. Were the matter like this, there would be no way upon examination to distinguish right from wrong. So how can we accept it as correct? When I used to go on pilgrimage, I would often encounter this sort of thing. In recent times, it has flourished even more widely. These good friends would gather together, an assembly of some 300 to 500, and seeing stars in their listeners' eyes would say that this is our Buddhist tradition's teachings in the South. Taking up the sixth ancestor's platform scripture, they would alter what it says by garnishing it with vulgar and rude comments and stories, whilst adulterating or deleting the wise and saintly intentions of the ancestor, thereby deluding and confusing their followers. How can this be considered the uttering of our teachings? How painful. It will be the death of our tradition." Abrahamic listeners of my show who like the thought of an eternal soul might think that these Shrenikans are in the right, and it is the Buddhists who are to blame for preaching anatman and emptiness. This is, however, in my opinion, not where the issue lies necessarily. To understand this, I need to tell you what is meant here by eyes sat a twinkle in ancient Chan literature. Basically, when all that can be said has been said, when one has reached the limits of language expressing truth, another gesture has to be performed. When eyes are sat a twinkle, the instant when we momentarily leave the symbolic order behind, we subjects bound by language are very vulnerable. It is pointed out again and again in the old texts that in this moment, a teacher who do not wish to do something evil must, instead of talking about emptiness or God, whatever you like, instruct the student to gaze at the ocean or a flower, etc. And only then, as a recently passed Korean icon painting master once showed me, will the student go to the universe and the universe will come to the student. That is how he put it. Not doing so would be to fill the emptiness with inconsistent nonsense, even if that nonsense were to be about the talked about topic of emptiness, or worse, instructions to do something awful, or just talk about confusion, right? I think we are dealing here then with the potential of what we in the West would call individual or mass hypnosis. And I believe it's safe to say that some of these secret societies possessed the dark praxis of that spiritual intelligence which this Buddhist master is warning about. And if the Red Spear societies did, they had wrapped it up in magico-religious Chinese folklore. And we could dwell for a long time on questions such as, can we intuitively know when our eyes are being sat a twinkle? Does it happen often? And whether if in such moments should we just get up and leave the neoliberal coaching seminars provided by our employers and instead take a well-deserved shit for an extended period of time? I know I have. But for now we need to get to the final part of this answer. What must be done? Should one perhaps take the path of the aforementioned Osho and reproduce in the brains of others a right-wing spiritual culture and a consumerism attuned to a new communal, hierarchical American life? I have a better suggestion, and some cadres of the not yet officially existing People's Liberation Army had one as well, when they arrived in Henan, the homeland of the first Shaolin temple, to prepare the infiltration of these local militias, to defend against the invading fascist Japanese Imperial Army and the post-war lordism of the Kuomintang. Let's set aside some time before we finish today's Q&A episode to take a look at and study their strategy. Eternal leader Kim Il-sung once said regarding the success of communist organizing, quote, Japanese imperialism is the enemy not only of the Korean people but also of the Chinese people. Only when the militant solidarity between the peoples of Korea and China is strengthened and the anti-Japanese united front cemented in their struggle against Japanese imperialism, the common enemy, can we deal it heavier political and military blows and hasted the victory of the Korean and Chinese revolutions. It is on this principle that we Korean communists have fought together on the common battlefront in firm unity with the anti-Japanese forces of the Chinese people from the early period of the anti-Japanese armed struggle, and moreover, we have made great efforts to unite with all Chinese anti-Japanese units that could possibly add up to a big force in the war against Japan. There are various Chinese anti-Japanese units. Among them are those under the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, and remnants of the former Northeastern Army under the Kuomintang, which, impelled by the Manchurian incident, rose to fight under an anti-Japanese Save the Nation banner. There are also anti-Japanese armed units formed by peasant rebels such as the Red Spear Society and the Broad Sword Society. There are some among us, however, who are not successful in forming a united front with other anti-Japanese units, because of their narrow outlook. If we do not do effective work with these units, they will be unable to withstand the enemy's relentless punitive operations, and are liable to waver, surrender, and turn traitor or take the backward step of becoming local bandits. Therefore, we must not ignore anti-Japanese units, but strengthen our united front with all of them. Even if they do waver and are not steadfast in their stand, we must give them positive leadership and continue to expand the anti-Japanese war so that we will isolate Japanese imperialism to the maximum and add muscle to our anti-Japanese armed forces." End of quote. International cross-ideological organizing around a united front is probably not how most people view Chuche praxis today. And though Japanese imperialism is perhaps not as relevant as it once was, I feel this is something the radical left must learn again. Of course, Kim Il-sung was not the only political commissar to mention the Red Spear Society. This had already become a major topic of the Central Committee organ of the CCP resolution on the peasant movement during the 20s of organization, leading up to the Mukden false flag in Manchuria of 1931, which Kim is talking about. A time when indeed even the Communist Party at times had to organize as a secret society in order to maneuver that united front, which included the Kuomintang, whilst trying to structurally undermine that national bourgeois and also fascist Confucian project. During the warlord period, Henan increasingly disintegrated into a fragmented society. The province was successively occupied by various warlord factions, each of whose leaders controlled a personal army. The ever-growing provincial military forces made increasing claims on local resources. Large segments of the provincial budget were allocated to support the military establishment and their wars. In 1923, for instance, 84% of the provincial budget went to military expenditure. This figure was only surpassed by those of two other provinces, Sichuan 88% and Hubei 94%. Though the spear societies grew faster than bamboo under these conditions, their makeup was far different from a CCP cell, and harnessing it to the goals of a party-directed peasant movement remained a delicate, if crucial, undertaking, if for no other reason that in many parts of North China, the spear societies already controlled the countryside. Henan in particular had become, declared as stringer for Beijing's Morning Post, the Qianbao, in the spring of 1926, a Red Spear world. And the implications of that was the specific subtext of the guarded observations in the Central Executive Committee of the Chinese Communist Party's Third Plenum's summer resolution. One of these predicaments was the nature of rural elite power and the question of whether to confront, circumvent, or subvert it in attempts to organize the countryside. The failure of the first operation in Guangdong and Zhejiang had suggested that the rural cadres act with greater sensitivity to local conditions, that is, in ways that would avoid alienating the broad mass of rural society and preclude an effective gentry response. It was also, as we will see, a project of how to convert metaphysical folklore into materialist folklore, not only as to successfully organize and unite the secret societies of the Red Spears, but also to keep the memory of that event and the revolution alive in the hearts and brains of the people. In short, how superstition can become class hatred of the real vampires. The plenum's, quote, resolution on the peasant movement, and of quote, thus took a utilitarian approach to rural mobilization, seeking not so much to enshrine it as the mainstay of a revolution as to redefine how it was to be conducted. While the peasant association remained the basic organizational template, the resolution stipulated that cadres should not shoehorn pre-existing rural organizations into the CCP peasant association format if they truly represented local farmers' interests, but rather allow them to join county-level peasant associations as whole entities. Nor in fact should such organizations be allowed to have a quote-unquote class orientation, for example compromise only tenant farmers or day laborers. Because of the quote extremely complicated and of quote nature of rural class relationships, it was not even advisable to use the term quote peasant class end of quote in mobilizing the broad mass of peasants against quote local bullies and evil gentry end of quote, which the measure insisted would be a highly select group. This would be dealt with and elaborated upon at length by Mao Zedong the next year in his famous report on an investigation of the peasant movement in Henan, March 1927. And just to be clear, Henan and Hunan are two different provinces. Hunan is a landlocked area of exceptionally fertile mountains just above Guangdong and Guangxi, the coastal provinces that make out the very south. Henan, on the other hand, is that central province known as the cradle of Chinese civilization and the early cultures of that part of the Yellow River, sort of in the bottom bottom left if you make a triangle between Shanghai to the right, Xi'an in the left, and Beijing as the top. Here broad-based coalitions then, including lesser landholders, would target only the most corrupted of rural kingpins and their strongmen. It was said by an organizer, quote, "We cannot simply put forth the slogan of overthrow the landlords. Using the slogan overthrow local bullies and evil gentry is in actuality overthrowing big landlords," end of quote. I would say that this evil gentry is at the time a strategic pre-Maoist term for what today's discontent Western commoners might call reptilians. So if you sense in this a contemporary strategy also for today and still oppose it because you just can't stand the ideological lepras of the QAnoners, you would probably find a friend in Comintern agent Mikhail Borodin, who actively opposed the CCP allying with groups like the Red Spears in order not to jeopardize the plan of communist infiltration of the Kuomintang military. Fortunately, though, Chinese party leaders took a different track, and in a separate, quote, resolution on the Red Spear Society movement, end of quote, they addressed the problem of the militias directly. Quote, "The Red Spear Societies are a product of warlord politics, primeval organizations for the self-defense of middle and small peasants no longer able to endure the predation of corrupt officials, exploitative taxes and levies, incursions of bandits and renegade soldiers, or suffered the impoverishment of imperialist economic aggression and victimization of local bullies and evil gentry." End of quote. And these are all quotes so far from the Chonggong Chongyang Shu Ji Chu, that is the Central Secretariat of the Chinese Communist Party, more specifically the Liuda Yiqian, Dang de Li She Cai Liao. So this was before the 6th Party Congress, materials on party history, which documents assembled in the 1980, trying to recapture, what went well and what went not so well during this time. Now, the resolution goes on to caution that its inclusion must also include its subversion, as to, quote, minimize the possibility of defeat and the danger of its reactionary character, end of quote. And again, maybe a similar approach should be upheld towards #MAGA communism. I do not know. I'm not an American. It's not my task to perform an investigation of the wage earner movement of the greater Rust Bible Belt. But maybe someone should. Will, is, or has. In theory, the spear societies seemed poor allies. After all, local elites bankrolled most of them, while bandits and renegade soldiers dominated enough of the rest that the resolution opened by warning against characterizing the entire movement as such. Quote, because of their indiscipline and superstition, end of quote, it was parenthetically explained, quote, spear societies don't hold up in battle and are rich in destructive tendencies while short on constructive ones, end of quote. This superstition would, however, be proven a useful double-edged sword, or spear, if you like. It actually already had a generation earlier, during the Donghak peasant revolution in Korea in 1894 to 1895, when the first revolt of that revolution, which involved similar social formations, in particular an incident when pro-rebel peasants put water inside the cannons of the governmental forces and later helped spread a rumor among that enemy that it had been done by ghosts, which they believed. Eventually, this psychological and physical operation resulted in a small rebel victory when more than 300 governmental forces, but only 2 rebels, died in the battle of the Hwangryong River. Most importantly, though, CCP influence over spear societies potentially solved 2 problems at once: preventing them from serving reactionary interests while providing cadres with local muscle and prestige. Thus, the plenum's quote, resolution on the Red Spear Society movement, end of quote, envisioned the militias as homegrown muscle for peasant associations in some places, or as the basis for such organizations in others. A first step in completing this task was through the establishment of liaison offices to facilitate intelligence sharing between spear society leaders and local cadres. Over time, such offices would become guiding organs, 指导机关. Through these offices, cadres would also begin propagating an elementary political program based on a handful of simple, innocuous slogans such as, quote, resist local bandits, end of quote, quote, resist corrupt officials, end of quote, and, quote, maintain local order, end of quote. So, once again, maybe something for the balkanization of Europe and America in the I don't know how near future. And I say that because many of us on the parapolitical left are talking about social tech these days. Still, it might come as a surprise to know that the plenum also concluded that to successfully harness the spear societies to revolutionary aims also required guidance for dealing with the group's volatile ceremonial complex. This would be the creation of a communist cypress tree of comradeship, even if that meant it would have to include blended martial arts training and the especially popular body hardening technique of invulnerability rituals derived from exorcistic traditions of popular Taoism, in particular those involving the consecration and ingestion of apotropaic charms. Now, apotropaic is the Greek word for protective magic, such as the Western gestures of the sign of the cross, or knocking on wood, or upside down, or is it the downside up, horseshoes. Maybe even the strength, who knows, of a cyanide capsule should one, dread the fear of succumbing to torture. Quote, it would be unnecessary to oppose the superstitious dogma, the Mi Xin Jiao Tiao of the militias, because the main element enabling them to unite and struggle is precisely this, end of quote. The superstition was, in the eyes of the compromising materialists, quote, an unavoidable phenomenon of a backward peasantry. All that is necessary is for their actual activities to benefit development of the revolution, end of quote. 马上的 Shang Jia Duo, Li Se-qing, Liu Qing-fan are 4 of the many returning Marxist-Leninist students in the big cities and card-carrying Communist Party members who set out to map in detail the spear society geography and leadership structure of their old home villages. Chueshan, their home county, is one of 159 counties in Henan. There they found that it was potentially home to close to 140,000 spear society militiamen, while Xinjiang, to the south, could boast more than 100,000. Local elites organized and funded the vast majority of such chapters, while martial artists and ritual specialists trained and commanded them. CCP organizer Li Seqing, mentioned above, set up a threefold typology for the cadres to use in their categorizing the militias of the area. Quote, those of true peasant character, those of controlled by gentry, and those of local bandit character. So, true peasant character, the highest, controlled by gentry, the mid-level, and the worst, local bandit character. The highest level of Chueshan's informal militia command structure eventually divided the county's 41 wards among 4 routes, different lu, each overseen by a supreme commander, Zong Ziling. One spear society dominated the northern route, where martial arts and ritual master Xu Yaocai commanded 40,000 militiamen. Xu's peasant background and, in the words of CCP cadre Li Seqing, quote, relatively strong anti-feudal consciousness, end of quote, would make him a focus of mobilization efforts. Politically and militarily, the eastern and southern routes were most important, mustering roughly 100,000 men with 200 firearms, most of whom received training from a ritual instructor who circulated among the chapters. One report listed Ouyang Bingyang as supreme commander of the eastern route. Ouyang, along with the anti-feudal Xu Yaocai mentioned above, would be one of 2 commanders of the peasant self-defense army, the Nongmin Si Wei Jun, that the CCP established after the initial success of the Chueshan revolt, but would unfortunately eventually betray the cause following the breakdown of the United Front. Spear society leaders mobilized Chueshan chapters into one of 3 states of readiness by sounding gongs and posting notices on placards and signboards, called Pai. A quote-unquote training board, that is a Lian Pai, convened militiamen for a drill. The quote-unquote demonstration board, that is the Liang Pai, assembled chapters for public displays of power to warn prospective enemies. Finally, the summons board, the Chuan Pai, was a call to battle. One leader, Chang Li Shan, was 34 years old in the fall of 1926 when an old friend and classmate, our CCP organizer, Li Seqing, approached him regarding an alliance with his Spear Society forces. This political commissar must have done a great job, since not only did Chang lend his forces to the peasant movement, he convinced Ouyang Bingyang, the supreme commander of the eastern route, to follow the CCP's initiative in the Chueshan uprising as well. At the same time, Ma Shangde, another of the CCP organizers, persuaded the Xu Yaocai of the aforementioned relatively strong anti-feudal consciousness to commit his forces. And so it came to be that the Chueshan Peasant Association, the Chueshan Nongmin Jie Hui, notice the Hui, was established on February 15 at the Jade Emperor Temple, under cover of its temple fair. Spear Society leaders Chang Li Shan, Xu Yaocai, and Ouyang Bingyang took seats on the executive committee, alongside party representatives Ma Shangde, Chang Jiaduo, and Chang Yaochang. The Chueshan Spear Societies and CCP alliance were exalted in local songs remembered until this day, and one of them goes like this. Peasant armed forces took to the county seat, posting notices to keep the people at peace. Harsh taxes and fees were all preempted. From 3 years' grain tax all were released. When the masses saw this notice posted, not a single one of them wasn't pleased. I'm not sure about the melody, so that's why I chose not to sing it, but maybe I'll find the song eventually. I did a lot of research, but I couldn't track it down. As CCP cadres were increasingly seen as wielding magical power necessary in the fight against the evil gentry, more and more people lent their support to what Red Shaman leaders began calling community exorcism. As word of Spear Society exploits in North China spread by print and oral media such as folk songs, news reports, and even popular fiction, the regenerative aspect of the cultural dialectic fueled the movement. The cultural imagination that produced and empowered the Spear Societies in turn embraced them, incorporating them into an ongoing process of storytelling and fable-making. When a generation later, the party state assumed control of cultural production, revolutionary heroism remained a core motif as Spear Society mystique became part of the official narrative and would flare up again during the Cultural Revolution. Likening Chueshan's significance to that of the Paris Commune, Henan Academy of Social Sciences historians wrote in 1988 that, quote, although the Chueshan peasant worker government was soon defeated, the historic contributions of the heroes who founded it will live forever in the history books. So in conclusion, even though they might have lost the battle, they won the war. What is often considered the communists' second revolutionary mobilization was due to a pragmatism strikingly different from the first, far more successful. With the help of local cadres, ordered to return to their hometowns in Henan by the party, they succeeded in instigating a rural revolution and to pave the way for the coming Northern expedition. Penetrating deeply into the countryside where these revolutionaries again succeeded in recruiting about 1 million peasants into peasant associations. Cadres were also able to reorganize the local Red Spears sectarians into peasant self-defense armies, which were used as the communist fighting force in the countryside. When nationalist and communist troops of the National Revolutionary Army approached the area, thousands of peasants rose up in revolt to join them. They resisted paying taxes to the warlord government and joined the communists in the redistribution of the evil gentry's property. Indeed, a social revolution was in the making in the broad countryside. Active peasant participation, Marxist historians argue, was crucial for the success of the nationalist revolution. During the fighting, peasants voluntarily gave the soldiers food, assisted in the transportation of military material, gathered military intelligence, and served the army as guides. Peasants' revolts behind enemy lines, they contend, hastened the collapse of the Fengtian army of warlord Chang Zuolin as he lost Beijing, which eventually brought the Northern expedition to a successful conclusion. The new Kalpa of a People's Republic, which the Red Shamans had prophesied, was brought into material existence with a little help of Zen magic and communist political organization.
We